Hey everybody, Mrs. Mancuso here, and we are starting off our unit on ecology. So we start off with, what do you think about when you hear the word ecology? So there's so many things. I think right away you think about the environment and like interactions amongst organisms and how do the organisms interact with the physical environment. And as the physical environment changes, how do populations adapt and how do different populations in the same community, how do they interact with each other? So all of those things are true. They're all related to ecology. The main idea is relationships between organisms and their physical environment. And then we're going to break it up into these sections. This is directly from the AP Bio latest curriculum. So the first video is going to be focused just on this 8.1 behaviors and physiological responses to internal and external cues. And then the next video will focus on energy flow. So like food webs and trophic levels. And then next we'll go into population growth. So logistic and exponential growth. Then we'll get into community interaction. So how do different species work together? So like symbiosis and predator-prey relationships, things like that. Then into biodiversity. So the number of different species you have in an area and how that is related to resilience, both of the ecosystem and each population within it. And then lastly, we'll focus on human impact to the environment and disruptions that have happened. So as we go through, remember, really focus just on this core information that you want to get into your notes. And then in class, we're going to do all the explorations of examples, different case studies, analyzing data, practice AP questions. So we're just going to get the notes done right here so that we can really dive into it in class. So first thing, it's all about population survival. So survival always gets linked back to natural selection. Those who are most fit for the environment will survive and then have that reproductive success, passing on those successful genes to their offspring. In order to survive, you've got to be able to respond and change as the environment changes. So we're going to talk about factors that are abiotic, so like physical changes, and then living changes, biotic factors. So examples of abiotic changes are like if there's more pollution or the acidity of the water or the soil, changes in overall temperatures, carbon dioxide levels, quality of soil, available habitats, anything that is a physical change, that's an example of an abiotic change. A biotic change is a living change. So predator levels, prey levels. So who's eating you and who are you eating? Disease, because disease is like bacteria. So bacteria that are trying to get in you or other organisms, that's a living thing. Competition for food and space, and then metabolic waste. So even though the waste itself is not alive, it is a nitrogen-based waste that's coming from another organism. So like urine, urea, uric acid, all of those things are really like pollutants to an area and can affect how many can live in that space. That's why us having sanitation systems is so important for human survival. All right, changing behavior. So again, we've got to be able to adapt, and you can't just evolve. The ones that are most fit are going to survive, and that's evolution, but we also just change our behavior. So I'm not just talking about humans, I'm talking about all different organisms. How do they change their behavior based on biotic or abiotic changes? So you might have to find sun, you might have to migrate, you might have to look for water, find new food sources. Fight for territory, fight for mates. All of those are changes in behavior based on biotic or abiotic changes in your environment. And then changing physiology is another key piece of it. So not just changing what you do to your body in an outward way, but inside your body, how can you adapt and change? So like increasing heart rate or being able to lay more eggs or consume more oxygen or have ways to increase the oxygen absorption. or changes in blood components, or gamete production, timing, even immune changes. Those are all physiology changes because they're internal. All right, then we move on to animal behavior. So to truly understand these changes and how animals do them, you have to understand a little bit about animal behavior. So animal behavior just means the ways that animals interact with each other, and both organisms of the same population and different populations, and the ways that they interact with the physical environment. When we're looking at behaviors, we're looking at how do they change their activity based on a stimulus. So a stimulus is a cue, and it can be from an external thing like a predator coming at you, or an internal cue like the acidity of the blood increasing. Both of those are stimuli, and you need to respond to them. And in studying animal behavior, so this is the study of ethology, and I took an entire course on it in college. So if this is something that really interests you, it's super interesting class to take in college if you can, as an elective. So we want to know what causes this behavior, how it develops, what's the benefit, and how did it come to be? How did it evolve? All right, there are two types of behaviors. Innate, you are born with, and learned, you pick up along the way. So innate are things like your reflexes. So if you go into the doctor's office, your mom didn't prep you and say like, hey, they're about to bang on your knee. When they do that, give it a good kick. Nope, no one told you it. You did it right from the very beginning. So that is an innate behavior. Fixed action patterns are exactly like they sound. It's something that you do in a repeated way. It always goes to completion. And I'll do a bunch of examples of these in class, but you don't have to think about it. It's instinctual. Migration or any sort of kinesis and movement tends to be instinctual. Things that are learned, I have three examples here. Habituation is learning to ignore meaningless stimuli. And so what that means, think of like a little baby bird and leaves start falling in the nest. And at first they're like, oh my gosh, so scared of the falling leaves. But then they learn like, oh, the falling leaves did not pose a harm to me in any way. So you learn to ignore them. Just like you, when maybe you're home alone and it starts storming and the rain is hitting the windows or tree branches or something like that. And at first, it really scares you a lot because you think that you might be in fear, for your life, something's going on. But then you quickly learn like, oh, it's just the rain, it's just the wind, it's just the tree branches hitting the window. It's not going to harm me. So you learn to ignore meaningless stimuli. All right, and then there's two big types of conditioning, which is a learned behavior. Classical conditioning is like Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov would ring the bell and then bring in food, and the dogs would eat the food. And they started associating the ringing of the bell with food was coming. So they started salivating, and they started like getting ready for the food to be there because they associated the neutral stimulus of the bell with a reward that they were going to get. Operant conditioning is learning from your own experiences. So I am sure you have eaten some expired food. So like, let's say you go in the fridge and you're like, oh, I really want a yogurt, but this one's expired. I'm going to eat it anyways. And so you eat it and it makes you really sick and you throw up and you learn from it. You learned that that was a punishment. Eating something that is past the expiration date was not a good experience and you don't do it anymore. Or a reward would be like, okay, so there is this man Skinner, and he did these experiments with rats, and he put them in these little boxes, literally called Skinner's boxes, and he had little buttons, and there was one button that was for a reward and food would come out, and there was another button that would shock them. And so the mice learned very quickly, like, oh, hit the one that gets me more food and don't ever hit the one that gave me a shock. So that's learning based on your own behavior. All right, next, behavior, definitely, we always go back to this term natural selection, because if a behavior helps increase your fitness, you are not only going to survive, you're going to be able to have offspring. So definitely those behaviors that led you to fitness, that led you to reproductive success, they are going to continue and increase in the population. All right, moving right along. Next, communication. So, this is a really basic idea, and I think that you guys are very familiar probably with everything that we're going to do in this ecology unit, which is nice. Last unit of the year, if things seem pretty familiar, that's a fabulous thing. But communication's just a way to transfer information from one organism to another. And it can be between organisms of the same species, like organisms that are in your same population, but it also could be to a different population, to a different species. Signals. So signals can be visual, they could be auditory, they could be chemical, or they could be touch based. There's 4 different types. So pheromones, I highlighted or I put in bold here because they come up quite frequently. So those are the chemicals that are made by organisms. And sometimes you notice the smell, and sometimes that smell is picked up by cells in your body, and sometimes you don't outwardly even smell it, but they are definitely having an effect on your physiology. All right, communication is important in finding mates, dominance. So like there could be an alpha male in the group, and that's based on how they have ranked themselves, and usually communication has a lot to do with it. Defending territories, coordinating group behaviors. I'm going to go over some of those in a minute, and taking care of young. So there's many, many benefits to communication, and that is why it has evolved, and that there are literally those 4 different types, because it's so important to be able to communicate. It definitely offers you the advantage of fitness and your population surviving. All right, last slide here, foraging. Foraging is about getting food. So individually, we call it a trade-off. You always have to balance out like, well, I could hunt down this animal and that would be a great benefit. But the cost that I would have to put in to actually get the food might not be worth it. I might die in the process of trying to get that food. So individually, there's always trade-offs. But then cooperation is better, because if organisms work together, they usually get a better payoff. They usually get a better benefit. So think about like hunting in packs. Or even like pelicans, they do something really cool. They will go in shallow water and they will circle up. And when they circle up, they have gotten fish in a small little circle between them all. And then they've sort of like narrowed them down, and now they can hunt them in a very small area. Or if you think of like hyenas hunting in packs, they wouldn't individually be able to take down a zebra, but as a pack, they could take down a zebra, which is a much greater benefit. Or fish in schools, that cooperation is also a great benefit. So those are the two most common things, is for hunting or protection. It always links back to evolution. So because they were able to get more food, they increased their fitness, they increased their survival and their number of offspring, and it really benefited the whole population foraging together. And then the last one is altruism. So altruism is selfless behavior. And the first one is kin selection. So kin selection is you will sacrifice for someone that you share genes with. So someone that you there's this guy Thompson, and he has all these rules like, I will sacrifice for my child, my grandmother, but not the guy that lives 3 boroughs down. So you will sacrifice for those that you share genes with, your direct offspring. And it's basically for the common good. So a great example is prairie dogs. So those little prairie dogs, they'll come out of their burrows, and there will be one guy that's like on watch, and he will scream out a call if a predator is coming. And it might mean that he is sacrificed. He might be the one caught by the predator, but he saves all of his population because they quickly run into the burrows and hide. So that is what altruism is. All right, so that is the end of our first video, and we will do a lot of work with all of this content in class. Bye-bye.